Hello. So we're here to talk about the shadow side of the voice wound. I'm going to invite a few people. Okay, so I'm just inviting a few people who might be interested, some friends and whatnot. All right, oops, there we go. Okay, so for those of you who may not be familiar with the term shadow, hi Whitney. What I'm talking about is our dark side. A lot of people in the spiritual space focus a lot on light and high vibe, which I talked about before last week or a couple weeks ago. And the shadow side is not all bad. It is not all bad if you're conscious about it. And a lot of what I learned, just full disclosure and to give credit where credit is due, a lot of what I've learned about the shadow side is from the Woo Collective, Laureen and Shakisha from the Woo Collective, and from Satwinder, Simone Isser, who is my teacher for the Akashic Records, as well as other people that I'm connected to. So they are more knowledgeable about how to work with your shadow side in general. But this comes up a lot when you're talking about the voice wound, because oftentimes when you're not conscious about what's happening with your shadow side, then or the things that kind of come up in your shadow, yes, yay teachers, when you're not conscious about it, then you're going to cause harm. When you are consciously working through your shadows and you are aware of what's going on, then you're not necessarily going to cause harm, or at least the same level of harm, because you are aware of what your wounds are, what you're working with, and how to be aware of when those shadows get triggered into spazzing out, and that's something that's ultimately your responsibility. So the part of the reason that this came up for me is because I had somebody share some things that were harmful with me. I conversed with this person, encouraged them to look up different resources and things like that. But in the end, I had to take some action because they weren't doing their work, their necessary work to learn, and they weren't open to learning. And I had to alert a community of mine that this person was potentially harmful. And they told me that they felt like I was a safe person to talk to about these things because of the free your voice thing. So I felt it was really important to clarify what exactly my work is, because anybody who follows me on social media sees that I talk a lot about social justice issues and talk a lot about people who are marginalized and things that we need to be aware of. And I don't allow harm in my spaces. I call it out when I see it. And I hold people accountable as much as I can, and I expect the same in return. So this is where the voice wound comes in. When we speak, even if we feel like we're expressing our full selves and our authentic selves, part of your authentic self may be speaking from your shadow. And that means that you're speaking from your wounded places, and you're speaking from the places where you need to grow and perhaps be open to learning things from other people. as opposed to just, oh, this is my truth, so it's fine, I'm freeing my voice and yada yada, and, you know, living without consequences or speaking without consequence. But the thing is, when you free your voice, you have to recognize that if you are speaking from an unconscious place or from a place of woundedness, from the voice wound without actually working on healing it, it's going to cause harm to other people. You're going to harm people in your family, in your relationships, because of your unhealed places. You're going to potentially harm clients, potentially harm the people that you work with, your colleagues, your peers. It's going to happen if you're not consciously working through your voice wound or, you know, your other wounds, because they all tie in together. So for those who may not be familiar with my work and like, what are you talking about? The voice wound. The voice wound is the place, are the wounds and the places in your life, your negative patterns and things like that, that are related to a source of wounding having to do with your self-expression. So for instance, that can show up like being dismissed as a kid, and that pattern continues, that you don't feel like you can express yourself or share who you are with people or be vulnerable. Sometimes that can mean that you overcompensate by talking a lot but not really saying anything, filling up silence with your voice as opposed to being okay with not speaking. Because freeing your voice is more than just speaking whatever comes to your mind. It starts with connecting to your inner voice, and part of connecting to your inner voice is learning to recognize what is true about who you are and what you believe in your purpose, and what comes from a place of woundedness, and what is actually holding you back, or in this case, potentially causing harm to other people at the same time. So this awareness is key. And that's why the first thing that I do with people before I do a voice session, if they're, oh, you're welcome. Before you do any physical voice work for my coaching clients, I start with an Akashic record session to find out what wounds need healing and what things need to be healed and need to be embodied before getting into that. Because before you, even physically, before you sing, before you speak, you have to take a breath. You have to connect with your body and with yourself before you do that. And you have to do that spiritually and psychologically as well, in order to be able to express yourself. Because if you aren't fully connected to your inner voice in a healthy way, then what you speak is not going to be healthy either. So I not only work on healing and things like that, but I also, through the Akashic Records, give people steps that they can use to actually embody the lessons that they need to learn in order to break those patterns and in order to really fully connect with their inner voice and their truest selves. Because that's really what it's all about. When you're connected to your truest self, then your self-expression that comes out from that is authentic and it's true. And you're always going to be on a journey. Like, there's always going to be something new that you come back to. I think of healing as like a cycle that goes up. Like, you always kind of go back to that same place, but you're doing a different level of healing every time you come back to those places. So that's something that was really on my heart, because I think that's a big misconception that, you know, we can speak our truth, that we can just say whatever we want to say. But when you don't think about the harm that it can cause other people, and I don't mean holding boundaries, because that's different. Somebody might get their feelings hurt by you holding your boundaries. That's different than hurting someone because you're speaking from a place of woundedness. One example I was thinking of is, and this often happens in parent-child relationships, where you have a wounding, like, let's say, I'm trying to think of a non-real life example. Okay, let's say your parents did not let you dye your hair, and you wanted to have fun with it as a kid. You wanted to dye your hair purple as a teenager or whatever. But your parents wouldn't let you do that. They would not allow you to. Sometimes what happens is that gets passed on to the next generation in the same way. So you end up internalizing that message that like colored hair means XYZ. Like, you know, it means that you're not going to be taken seriously, or you know, you can't get a job, or you can't be the type of person that you want to be if you have, you know, blue hair or purple hair. So you can internalize that message and that message about your self-expression, and then do the same thing to your children because you haven't healed that wound. Or sometimes what happens is the flip side happens. You maybe, instead of also restricting that with your children, you're perhaps too permissive. You let your kids do whatever they want with with no consideration for how it might negatively affect them. So in this example, you know, let's say that with hair, I kind of don't really think there's much that can go wrong. But let's say, you know, your kid is 10 and they also want to get a nose piercing. So maybe because of that wound not being healed, you're like, sure, yeah, you can do that. Even though they're, you know, too young or whatever. That might not be the best example, but you get my idea. You get the idea. So sometimes that can be what I kind of think of as a rebound wound, or a rebound reaction to a wound. So that's something that can happen if you have these unhealed places. And so you end up causing harm because maybe your kid, you know, is like, grows up and they're like, oh, but this, you know, piercing that I have that's not really normal for or appropriate for a kid is, you know, I wish that I hadn't gotten it. Like I wasn't old enough to make that decision or whatever. So that's the kind of thing that, like that's just a small example. Like if you think about it in terms of bigger wounds, that can really have a big effect on other people. And so the way that can also show up is perhaps saying, like you heard a certain message from your family. Like let's say you heard that you internalized the message that children should be seen and not heard. And so, you know, you internalize that message that you are not allowed to speak up, and that ends up affecting you within adulthood as well. And so sometimes maybe you see other people who do speak up for themselves and they're speaking up in a healthy way, but that bothers you because you're not allowed to do that because of your own internal programming and your own wounds. So you're not allowed to speak up. And so you get angry at somebody else speaking up for themselves or for, you know, whatever. And so you see somebody who is strong and steady within themselves, and that triggers that wound. And so you might end up saying something like, you shouldn't be saying that, or, you know, that's not okay, when in fact they're just holding their own boundary in a healthy way. And so you're actually the one causing harm. So that's where those kinds of things can show up related to self-expression. Does anybody have any questions for me at this point? I know I've got a couple people on live. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to mention. Oh, the other thing too is that many times, especially in the healing community and particularly in kind of more new age-ish things, we can sometimes get stuck in the idea of healing, and then it's healed. You know, it's done. But there's healing, and then there's embodying the healing. So you heal a wound, but then you don't actually live out the lesson from it. So going back to that example of not feeling like you can speak up strongly and getting mad at other people who do so, you have to start to embody the fact that you've done that healing work and that you can speak up. So you can't just like do the energetic healing work or the spiritual healing work and not actually live it out. You have to live it out. And so that is the key to actually kind of completing the healing. And that's something that you have to take responsibility for. Because otherwise you're just going to keep saying the same things. Maybe it won't have the same energy behind it. But that's still going to come out, and that wounding and that harm is still going to happen. Yes. Yeah, it's very, very important to actually act out and embody the healing and live it out, I should say, versus just like, oh, I'm okay now, I'm good. And then the next thing you know, like, oh, maybe I didn't heal that place so much, but really it's just that you missed the embodiment part of it. Yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have on that, unless anybody hops in with a question. And so, since I mentioned this already, the Free Your Voice method, the coaching program that I offer, I start out with identifying those wounds and those patterns that are showing up in your life, change the energy of that, and then give you some tools to help embody that as you go. And I don't just say, okay, like, here are some tools, here you go, you know, here's what you need to do. The Free Your Voice sessions, where I actually do voice work with you, that is one way where you can actually physically embody some of the lessons that come up. So as you'll gain not only spiritual tools, but also physical tools to help you embody that healing that happens and embody that spiritual shift that happens. So you're actually able to have something tangible to hold on to as you go through that process. And so you'll be able to physically see that change as well as spiritually and energetically. And then we finish it off with, you know, kind of a completion session on the Akashic Records. And the in-between sessions will vary depending on what somebody needs and what their specific goals are. But that coaching is available, and I'm available if this really resonates with you and you want to work with me. Please feel free to contact me, send me a private message. You can ask me more questions if you'd like, or we can set up a call if you have a few questions. But it's really important that first you connect with your inner voice and connect with who you truly are at the core, and then go on to embody that in a healthy manner and in a holistic and conscious manner. So thank you so much for hopping on with me or watching the replay. Yes, thank you, Whitney. She said, I love how you connect the authentic voice with wounding and how healing is needed. Yes, it's a really important step that I think a lot of people miss. They're like, oh, I'm, speaking my truth or being authentic. And it's like, yeah, but you're authentically sharing your wounds with the world and harming other people in the process. So we don't, like, nobody wants to do that. We, we want to be able to be our most authentic selves, and that includes our most healed and whole selves. So thank you again for watching. If you're just hopping on, be sure to check the beginning and watch the video. I talk about the process about the voice wound, how that can show up in an unhealthy way, and how you can kind of work on healing that, and why it's important to embody the healing in a physical way and in a spiritual and energetic way as well, so that you don't end up causing harm to other people. So again, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time I'm live. Bye.